So welcome to today's webinar on the Canadian emergency response to flammable liquid incident in transport and the medium and heavy duty zero emission vehicles. If you haven't met me before, I'm Ken McMullen. I'm the fire chief in Red Deer, Alberta, Canada, a fully integrated fire EMS system here in Alberta, as well as I'm very lucky and honored to be the elected president of the Canadian Association of Fire Chiefs. We have a terrific audience, and I know you'll find the next hour very, very well spent. As part of my welcome, I'd like to begin by acknowledging that the national office of the CAFC is in and on the unceded and unsurrendered territories of the Anishinaabe and the Algonquin people. We acknowledge them as the keepers of the Ottawa Rivershed and its tributaries. We recognize the hurts and harms of the past, as well as the strength and resilience of the people, and believe working together can make for a much better future. Before we get started, I would certainly like to thank Transport Canada for partnering with the Canadian Association of Fire Chiefs to make this program available and providing resources to help us prepare for the medium and high hazard zero emission vehicles report. We are grateful that you have chosen to work with us, and we look forward to continuing our work together. Today, we will provide you with information on two different items. First, the Canadian emergency response to flammable liquid incidents in transport, the training program, as well as the medium and heavy duty zero emissions vehicles, regulations and resources. We will provide you with the findings on the report that we have penned, and our guests from Transport Canada will then speak to you about new regulations. At the end of the session, we will open it up the floor for questions. So let us get started. I would like to invite our first speakers, a good friend and colleague of mine from previous years, Brian Lads and Corey Schramm, to speak about the Canadian Emergency Response Flammable Incidents Liquids in Transport Training Program, affectionately known as CERFLIT. Shortly after the Lac-Mégantic incident occurred, a multi-industry curriculum design team, which included CAFC, was tasked by Transport Canada with creating a national training program for all first responders. The CERFLIT curriculum is the collected final product of this collaboration between many organizations and corporations with the goal of keeping first responders prepared and safe. I'd like to welcome Brian Lads, who is now a consultant and was the hazardous materials manager at the Calgary Fire Department, and Corey Schramm, Chief Training Officer with the St. Albert Fire Service. Both represented CFC on the development of this program, and we thank you both. Brian and Corey, before I turn it over to you, I'll just again say thank you to our Executive Director, Dr. Tina Saradine, and the wonderful staff of the CFC who do a tremendous amount of work in the background. I know there are other presenters that'll be with you for the day. Unfortunately, my time is limited, so I'm not sure how long I'll be staying on the call. So I'm going to turn it back to our executive director to help do the introductions of the remaining presenters as we get through your next 45 minutes. So to that, Tina, thank you for allowing me the chance to come and bring greetings on behalf of the board. And I know this will be a great presentation for all that's in attendance.
Thank you to you, Chief McMullen, and we're thrilled to have you here and thrilled to have our presenters. So thank you, and Brian, we'll turn it over to you.
Okay. Good morning and good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for attending. We're just going to run through a couple of demonstration slides here that shows you how to access this program. And as Chief McMullen said, this is the mostly complete final work product that's taken many years. This isn't anything new. This material has been around in various formats and various forms in terms of its curriculum development, even before Lac-Mégantic occurred. So this is just the access point for all of the materials. We'll go to the next slide, please. And my great colleague, Corey, please interject whenever you think.
Certainly will do, Brian.
Yeah. So the Canadian Emergency Response Flammable Liquids rests in part 2 and part 3 on the website here.
Mm-hmm.
There you go. This is where you can access it. Part 1, which is widely available online as a awareness program is available through Inform. Level 1 can be taken at any time. You can come and go from the program. It could be facilitated by a training officer to a classroom, or it can be for individual study. Level 2, I would encourage any department to first go through the list of resources and references at the end and familiarize yourself with the materials that are referenced throughout this curriculum. The first, of course, is there's a document from Transport Canada called You Are Not Alone, and that's listed in the references. And it describes a number of available materials and components to help address a large flammable liquid incident. The other one, of course, is to understand what material, resources, and assistance can be handled through Canutech. Canutech has access to emergency response plans, the ERAPs that are held for a variety of requirements under flammable liquids transport. They also can coordinate an emergency response contractor based on who holds the ERAP, etc. And I would encourage any department, no matter what size, what level, what competency, to reach out to the flammable liquid carriers in your region. That would include both road and rail. And if you don't have a Class 1 carrier such as Canadian National or Canadian Pacific Kansas City Southern, reach out to the Rail Association of Canada because they are a direct link to the short lines that might be operating in your area as well. And if you don't have a rail, then of course reach out to the road carriers. There are many that can provide assistance in either material, training props, or just get that collaborative understanding and mutual aid working together prior to having an incident. It'll take so many of the challenges out when you do have an incident in the event that you need these resources, you know who and you know what. So please reach out to your respective agencies in your area for assistance.
Yeah.
Part 2, which is called Level 2, is broken into 2 parts. Part 1 is the training curriculum, and it teaches tactics, outlines objectives, gives you background on how this product is moved, how it started, some of its behaviors. The part 2 gets into some defensive control product. So if there is a spill or a release, there are various methods to be very defensive and protect critical infrastructure without getting up close and personal with the product. And then the level 3 is really intended for those few larger departments in the country that have the capacity to mount an offensive attack.
Mhm.
And I would encourage you to make sure that even before you think you're ready to handle a level 3 response, again, you've done the training and you've done the cooperative ventures between each of the bulk liquid carriers in your regions.
And just to echo what Brian was saying with level 3 is, the bottom sentence there, it says taught by hazmat technicians and industry specialists, is to really engage them because this does provide you with the exposure of what your industry partners are available to you to support you if you ever to encounter an incident in your jurisdiction. And I would like to take this opportunity to really acknowledge industry and the agencies that supported the CFC and Transport Canada to provide us the material that we have today to make available to our first responders.
Yeah, Corey's absolutely right. None of this could have come together without the support of all of the facilities, the agencies, the organizations that got together over many years. And quite frankly, ultimately, the goal here is to make sure that first responders, and I'll say that first responders because it's not always just firefighters, is to make sure that everyone understands the risks involved with this type of product, understand your capacity, your capability, and go home safely
You bet.
and manage the incident well. But above all, be safe. That's the number one goal here.
And we encourage the departments that want to access this material to embed it into their existing training curriculum or content because it can really provide value added content to what you already may have.
Next slide, please. So there's under level 2, you'll see there's something here called the eligibility criteria. This is also referred to as the competency guidelines, and you'll see those listed in the references and resources at the end of the program. I would encourage any department of any size to review this material. It is designed to ensure that the firefighters that are going to be performing these objective tactics have the training and the skills to do so. And it's really a good guideline to see that you're following along with um, not only the skill sets that are taught and demonstrated within the NFPA, formerly 472, now 470, but to make sure that we're not missing anything, that if you need access to specialized equipment or it's just a really good check. So I would encourage you to go download it. I did go online yesterday and I looked, and it is still the 2012 version, or sorry, 2022, I think was the last time it was updated. And it does not reference NFPA 470, but I know that that work has been completed. So nothing changed as far as this curriculum material in the transition from NFPA 472 to NFPA 470. So there's been no changes. So if you still have a copy of the 472 standard and that's what's referenced under the competency guidelines, nothing will differ if you move into the new 470. Next slide, please. This is the website for Transport Canada's You're Not Alone. There's a link here. If it doesn't open, just go to the Transport Canada official website and in the documentation search tool, type in "You Are Not Alone" and it'll give you an open link to this material. Once you click on that link, it opens up a whole series of, there's references for incident command structure, there's references to emergency response, there's of course the guidebook, there's other tactics that would involve the public works group or municipal services to support all of the various actions that would occur.
And
Next slide, please.
Provides you kind of a
Oh, sorry, Corey.
of how to walk through an algorithm of how to manage an incident and answer those questions that you may have that feel that you're over and above or overwhelmed as an incident commander.
Yeah, and that's a good point. That goes back to the collaborative approach that working with this training curriculum, the departments, I hope you don't feel like this is just your thing. It's not for, if you choose to deliver it alone, that's a choice. But it really was designed by the curriculum group and all of the developers to work collaboratively together. It really does work well when everybody comes together to work on this material. This is still a link to the competency guidelines, and it just really essentially lists the skills and competencies that various responders, including industry responders, should be competent and demonstrate that they do have those skills prior to moving into any of the offensive tactics that are listed here. So
And
it's really a check and balance.
While developing the competency guidelines, Shane Mintz, who was our Canadian representative of the NFPA, took these guidelines forward to their Dangerous Goods Committee.
Yeah, and these are also followed in the United States. So this is very much a cross-border, because there's, like I said, there's so many people that came together to work on this material. So thank you. And next slide, please. And this is the, I'll let CAFC talk about this. This is just really the consent form that provides you access into the material.
Yeah, thank you so much, Brian and Corey. Yeah, you were talking, Brian and Corey, about this being a curriculum. When you get to level 2, part 2, or level 3, this is not a course. So we don't want departments getting the impression that you download a course and you give people the course. This is the curriculum that people can use to develop the course. This is really important because, as Chief Uselok, our Dangerous Goods Chair, says, and as many of you say, a little information can be a dangerous thing. So we want to make sure when departments request the access to level 2 or level 3, they understand that 1, this is a curriculum, and 2, that they meet the criteria to develop this into training. So this is, it also helps us track who's asking for the material, but the onus really is on the department to ensure that they meet the criteria and that they understand the context of this training material. So that's really all this is, Brian I again want to thank you and Corey for representing CFC in such a long period of time over this. I think there's another consent form that is similar to level 3. So this is again the same thing. Please, if you're going into level 3, check the criteria. Make sure you've checked the eligibility criteria. It's a curriculum, not a course. And when you request it, Zoe has designed a form for you to ensure that you're thinking through all of the criteria that are required and that you understand what you're requesting and how to use it. So that's
And absolutely, and I'll follow that up with when we get into the advanced level 3, that because it is designed to be taught collaboratively between one of the flammable liquid carriers and their emergency response contractors, that this is scalable. So it can be taught on a very small scale in a burn pan, and those same skills can be taught on a much larger training prop at an organized fire training center. And it's that assessment that occurs between the training center, the fire department that's going to deliver this material, and the response contractors that are going to help to demonstrate those skills. That's an assessment that needs to occur. And there's a list of criteria within the curriculum guidelines that needs to be met.
Thank you for those clarifications, Brian. Like here I see on the slide, it says CERFLIT level 3 training consent form. So this is the consent form for requesting the material, not for giving the training, and we'll clarify that on the CFC website. So thanks for pointing that out. I think we've almost come to the end.
So.
Are there any other slides that we have here?
No, just the last one here. If there's any questions, Corey and I'd be happy to entertain your questions.
Amazing. Brian and Corey, thank you so much. We're going to have questions at the end of the 3 speakers because I'm afraid time runs on us. But again, heartfelt thank you to you both and to all the industry partners and other partners and to our audience members. We hope that you use this material in the spirit in which it's intended in good safety and with the right partners at the time. So we'll come back for questions, but now we're going to please stay on with us, and we're going to introduce our next speaker. So next part of the alphabet soup is a person many of you know very well, Mr. Kevin Jess, who's a former fire commissioner and a friend of the CFC and someone I often call upon to help CFC with some of its committee's reports. So he often works with our committees to develop our technical responses. So through our good friends at Transport Canada, we had the opportunity to do a review of the available training, research, and initiatives related to medium and heavy duty zero emissions vehicles. So I would like to, again, thank our friends at Transport Canada for working with the fire service. We're all introducing new innovations, new technologies. We're all appreciating the importance of zero emissions, and it's important to be able to do this work together. So without further ado, welcome, Kevin, and thank you for doing this for us, and thank you for being here.
Thank you very much, Tina. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. And before I start, I just wanted to reemphasize something that Brian and Corey brought up that I think is important as we go through all of this is working with the industry within your community, within your organization to know what the hazards are that you may be coming up upon or may be soon to occur in your area. So thank you. I was given the opportunity by CFC to do a quick report with the support of Transport Canada on what seems to be an upcoming concern. And one of the things we've learned over the years in fire is that getting ahead of the things that society will create and use is sometimes our biggest challenge. So without any further ado, if I can make this work, we're good. I can't make it work. There we go. So the report basically looks at zero emission drive technologies for medium and heavy duty, essentially transport vehicles, realizing that every one of them creates a newer or larger or both hazard for first responders and the public when things go wrong. And everything doesn't always go wrong, but in the fire service, we prepare for the worst and hope for the best. The literature throughout the last number of years, both in the fire services and publicly, speaks to numerous methods of suppressing zero emission vehicle fires, particularly battery electric vehicle fires, and how to deal with the environmental contamination that may or may not happen during that suppression. But there is no consensus to be found around the world in anything we've been able to determine on what the best methods for that are. The other thing we noted, and I guess this is perhaps always a concern, is that the consideration for fire suppression was never a prime consideration during the design, manufacture, and even the regulation to a certain extent of medium heavy duty zero emission vehicles, or to be honest, most other vehicles. Up-to-date information and training on these multiple technologies, and there are a number of them out there, and I expect more in the future that are going to compete, and where that landscape will eventually fold out is still up in the air, I would suggest. And the collaboration and coordination with fire service, industry, research, and government I think we're early enough in the process that can have significant benefits for both the public and the fire service as we move forward. As noted, the report is available on the website. The links are shown there, as well as the resource pages that my colleagues in the CAFC office have put together over the last couple of years to try and track and amalgamate those things, in addition to other websites that may be out there, particularly dealing with lithium-ion batteries. There's other links in there dealing with hydrogen vehicles, etc. So the resource tables are included within the report, but they're also available so that they can be added to and updated as we move forward. And here's just a sample of some of the processes that are there. The training, we outline a number of training courses and training information that can be used in fire departments and emergency response organizations. And we provide a short analysis as to what's available and what's there, as well as all of the other resources that we've been able to find. We've utilized things from NFPA, from various provinces, from both Department of Transport in the United States, some references from Europe and elsewhere. They're all in here to try and provide you with not a complete one-stop shop, but a good idea of what's available and what's out there in the process. For the most part, we focused on trucking, both delivery for local goods, trade services, plumbers, electricians, vehicles, drayage, or the hauling of materials between ships, rail, air, and warehouses, which seems to be one of the prime current adaptations or adoptions of zero emission vehicles, and long haul vehicles within the report. We'll talk at some length about both the test beds and the prototypes that are out there in that part of the world to deal with how do you provide zero emission trucking in a large, diverse country such as Canada. And although it wasn't a specific focus, we found that the examples and information were available about transit buses and school buses were informative, both given their broad global distribution and the analog that can be drawn between them and local delivery and drayage trucking is important in trying to do a hazard and risk assessment in your community. So as we went through this, as most of us are aware, when you get a call to 911 or wherever the emergency call goes to, the caller is rarely going to identify that there's an alternative energy source vehicle involved. So our initial scene evaluation risk assessment is accomplished at a distance. Many of you will recall the rule of thumb in approaching anything involving dangerous goods. So the few required markings under federal legislation on either side of the border and provincial legislation or federal standards that are adopted by provincial organizations, which means you have to put a note by the filler cap or under the hood, is not of particular value to first responders. If the vehicle isn't clearly identified by some other means as an alternative energy or alternative fuel vehicle, fire department, law enforcement, and EMS are going to have to do additional work. The NFPA standards that deal with hydrogen, liquid petroleum gas, compressed natural gas, and liquefied natural gas all require, in the standard at least, some identification on the right rear corner of the vehicle as to what that mode of fuel is. Those regulations, when they're adopted by US states, are not deemed to be offensive, according to the federal court in the states, to any of the federal regulations. But we've had no similar uptake on the premise of NFPA's documents in Canadian provincial jurisdictions. Transport Canada has full regulatory jurisdiction for vehicles across the country, but there's a mixed understanding of the interest or jurisdiction of provincial bodies in particular regarding the fuel types, energy storage, dispensing, vehicle conversion, etc. The codes related to electrical equipment, charging in particular, gas-fueled equipment for the production, storage, vehicle conversion, including hydrogen, LNG, CNG, LPG, are generated by standards development organizations in Canada, such as CSA and BNQ. Adoption of those codes is a provincial matter. And while some provinces are active in dealing with the issues and others are slowly getting involved, others have not been willing to engage in any safety discussions where vehicles or motor vehicles are involved, because their focus is almost always entirely on the built environment. So that creates a problem in getting a pan-Canadian consensus at the provincial level where the regulators exist. One of the things that's come out of some discussions in recent past is a request to the Standards Council of Canada to require appendixes in National Standards of Canada that might deal with managing the consequences of equipment failures, which is usually where the fire department gets involved from an emergency response capacity in these things. So we'll see where that goes. Some of the things we found, obviously, light duty vehicles give us a test bed to take a look at. And we have numerous iterations of propane, CNG, and battery electric vehicles on the market now. Battery electric vehicles in particular, fitting that zero emission vehicle profile. As I said earlier, there's a whole bunch of people out there who would like to tell you how to put out the electric vehicle or the lithium ion battery powered vehicle fire. But I came up with 7 distinct suggested tactics and strategies in the report. Water seems to become the champion, but creates its own problems, and there is no consensus, and I can find no consensus anywhere across the world. So if those concerns are all there for, in particular, light duty vehicles, we can, I think, clearly make the assumption that as the vehicles get bigger, as the energy stored either as electricity or as a compressed gas gets to be larger, then the situations that fire service deals with will also be larger. And there are often, in these cases, and I know we see lots in the literature these days about how we deal with parking garages and alternatively powered vehicles. a lot of the commercial work is done where trucks, buses seem to be the ones that show up in the literature particularly. If you store a bunch of them in one place, what sort of fuel load and hazard does that create and risk for the first responders in the community? Been unable to find anything that suggests that any of these power modes are any more inherently likely to be involved in a fire or a conflagration of those vehicles. But when they do show up, they make the press far more readily than something in a conventionally powered vehicle, and a lot more light is generated than heat in a lot of these things. But we've all seen the results of people getting concerned and excited about the new technologies, not necessarily comparing them to the current state. And throughout the entire process of writing the report, it was very difficult to find any regulatory direction on environmental concerns, particularly as it relates to what happens to the water that gets the runoff that occurs when you use large quantities of water to deal with a lithium-ion battery fire in a battery electric vehicle. So some of the needs we identified is an ongoing educational awareness. How do we make sure that first responders are aware of the hazards and risks that they may be attending? How do we identify these vehicles? What are the resources that we're going to need to deal with them when they do turn or wind up in a fire condition? What form should our risk assessment take, and what are the appropriate and most effective tactics to use during that suppression? We also found, in our opinion, that we think there's a need for a coordinated regulatory discussion on things like markings and prohibitions. I guess when I talk about markings, I mean, I think it's relatively likely currently that if somebody's driving, let's say, a hydrogen powered vehicle around, that it's going to be marked with H2 in bold letters everywhere so that everybody knows that it's a new vehicle. But that level of enthusiasm may fade, and although we can tell when we're following a Tesla down the road or other electric vehicle based on the fact that there's no exhaust pipe, some of the other determinations aren't necessarily as simple. That regulatory discussion needs to be pan-Canadian, federal, provincial, and territorial governments, hopefully in collaboration through a national fire administrator with Transport Canada, the other federal partners, the provincial fuel and energy regulators, and the fire service. The fire service, as we've mentioned before, is the organization that deals with when things go wrong in our world and new technologies or any technologies fail catastrophically. We need in-depth practical research to guide best practices in response and tactics. And we need to leverage and expand that through organizations such as UL's Fire Safety Research Institute, NFPA, UL itself, FM Global, because these aren't problems that are unique to the Canadian Fire Service or the North American Fire Service. They're going to be problems across the globe and need to be dealt with in hopefully a safe manner for the public, in particular the fire service. And data collection is extremely limited, as we found trying to find information to support the report's conclusions. Vehicle fires are routine in most reporting systems. If they're mandated, they're provincially mandated. They don't specifically speak to new fuel and energy types, identify them. We're finding that in other fire reporting that takes place within structure fires. So a means to update or enhance the data collection system is something else that would be of benefit to industry, government, and the fire service in particular. That summarizes the report, I think, but again, I'll be around for questions when we're done. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kevin. We appreciate that, and we're looking forward to any questions that the audience members have. And thank you for penning this report with us, and thank you to the members of the Dangerous Goods Committee who collaborated with you on this. And we're now at our third speaker. I see Jesse Almeida's with us from Transport Canada. And Jesse is going to be speaking to us about regulations related to not only medium and heavy duty zero emissions vehicles, but all zero emissions vehicles. So we're thrilled to have you, Jesse, and thank you to you and your colleagues at Transport Canada for caring so much about the fire service and for coming to talk to us today. Thank you.
All right, so thank you for having me. My name is Jesse Almeida. I'm currently managing the Standards and Regulatory Development team under our Road Safety Programs group, and our area of responsibility is to apply regulations for all new and imported motor vehicles in Canada. And I note that there's another name here, Kyle Hendershot. He's my colleague who's the lead on our zero emission vehicle file. And so I wanted to make sure that everyone here had both of our contact information if ever they wanted to reach out to us. So I'm going to speak about 4 different things today. The current motor vehicle safety requirements in Canada, some of the international regulatory development work that we've been doing, and our path forward with respect to regulations for zero emission vehicles. And then I'll touch a little bit on the research that we've been doing. So the first thing is our current motor vehicle safety regulations that apply to zero emission vehicles. So we currently have Canadian Motor Vehicle Safety Standard, CMVSS, to add to the alphabet soup, 305, electrolyte spillage and electrical shock protection. This was originally published in 2001 with some amendments made in 2018, and it applies to light duty vehicles. It includes post-crash requirements that are intended to minimize damage to cell pack and minimize risks of exposure to high voltage components after collision. And there are some in-use requirements as well to minimize risk of exposure to high voltage components. And I note that for hydrogen vehicles, we do not currently have any federal standards for those types of fuel systems. In terms of international regulatory development work, we tend to try not to work in a vacuum here in Canada. Our vehicle markets are very integrated, and so we try to, when possible, develop regulations at an international level so that they can be applied across the board. So we participated under the United Nations World Forum for the Harmonization of Vehicles, and this is with American colleagues from Europe, across the world, Asia, to develop 2 global technical regulations. And so we've been working on 2 global technical requirements. The first is GTR 20, which applies to electric vehicle safety. And this was published in 2018, and there's a phase 2 of the work that's currently ongoing. And so our phase 1 and what we currently have in Canada is all aligned with this global technical regulation. And there's also another that was developed, GTR 13, which is for hydrogen and fuel cell vehicles. This was originally published in 2012 with a phase 2 published in June 2023. So what are these global technical regulations, right? So electric vehicle safety under GTR 20, the main goals of this standard are to ensure equivalent levels of safety for conventional internal combustion vehicles and to have some performance-based requirements without limiting future development. And it identifies and assesses potential safety risks in 3 conditions. So the normal use and active driving, normal use during external charging, and in an accident, so during and post-crash. For GTR 13, hydrogen and fuel cell vehicle safety, this applies to light duty and heavy duty vehicles that have hydrogen storage systems. And the goal of this is to ensure equivalent level of safety, again, to internal combustion vehicles, and applies to both direct hydrogen injection and fuel cell vehicles. Now, I also want to mention that the US has put out some final rules, and these are, sets of regulations that they bring in domestically based on international work. So this is the US implementing those global technical regulations that I just mentioned. So Similarly to Canada, the naming convention is similar. Federal Motor Vehicle Safety Standard 305 for electric vehicles. There are some amendments that were made to that to introduce the new requirements and test procedures, such as performance and risk mitigation requirements for propulsion batteries. They also propose some unique requirements for thermal event warnings and thermal propagation. And there's the expansion of that standard to apply to vehicles of a higher gross vehicle weight rating, so the medium and heavy duty space. The other thing that they've included in their requirements is that vehicle manufacturers are going to be required to submit emergency response guides and rescue sheets to the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, the Transport Canada equivalent in the US, for each vehicle make, model, and model year. Oh, and they will publish that information on their website. Important point. The other final rule is for hydrogen vehicle safety. They create two new federal motor vehicle safety standards, 307 and 308. So one is for the fuel system integrity of hydrogen vehicles, and the other for compressed hydrogen storage systems. So what does this mean for Canada? Our Canadian Zero Emission Vehicle Safety Regulation path forward, we're starting to get into our regulatory development and bringing in the requirements that we've worked on at the international level and trying to align with our US partners as well. So the process that we have, and we're sort of at a really interesting point in that process right now, and that we're just starting it, is that we start with an informal consultation, and we're going to present that in the coming months, and it'll be a 60-day comment period. This consultation will include a lot of the details of what it is that we are considering proposing as regulation, and it serves as a first step for consultation with our stakeholders and the Canadian public. And then that will lead into amendments being made to Canadian Motor Vehicle Safety Standard 305 for electric vehicles, and the creation of new Canadian Motor Vehicle Safety Standards for hydrogen vehicle safety. The ultimate goal of everything that I've just mentioned is that we're trying to improve the safety requirements for zero emission vehicles by incorporating the work of the global technical regulations into our Canadian regulation. And the process there, we end up publishing a Canada Gazette Part 1, which is a pre-publication of the regulatory proposal. That's also followed by a 75-day comment period. So that allows for stakeholders to actually see what the regulations would say, provide feedback, input, comments, questions, and all of that is fed into the final regulatory development and the publication of what we call a Canada Gazette Part 2 within about 18 months. So usually that's the time frame between when you see a proposal and a final regulation. So as I mentioned earlier, we're really at the early stages of assessing all of this work and seeing how it translates into our domestic regulatory framework. So the background work is being done and discussions are ongoing with partners such as NFPA and MHZEV and others to determine the way forward with respect to the emergency response guides. As I mentioned, MHZEV is going to be hosting those and requiring them for manufacturers. So we're trying to determine what we're going to be doing here in Canada with respect to those. And I know that's of particular interest for those attending today. And there will also be more detail included in that informal consultation, and it will present the opportunity for stakeholders such as yourselves to provide comments on the approach that we are going to be considering and anything else that you think may be important for Transport Canada to consider in the regulatory development process. So I know it's a little bit vague in terms of all of the details, and it really is just because we're still figuring it all out at the front end. But I really wanted to highlight to everybody that this is coming, and that there will be this opportunity to provide comments, and we really do encourage everyone to provide feedback at each of those steps that were mentioned. So moving into the last part here, the discussion that I wanted to bring forward today is electric vehicle safety research. So I just wanted to touch on some of the work that we have done that has fed into the international standards development. So we can continue to conduct research through a project with the National Research Council. It's been going on for many years. And it's supported the standards development. We initially looked at how batteries and electric vehicles react to fire exposure. And the main focus over the past 10 years or so has been on single cell failure and thermal runaway leading to thermal. The research is focused on developing a test methodology and procedure to evaluate thermal propagation in vehicles. The NRC developed a rapid heating method and patented a trim device you see in the first image that is realistic, minimally invasive, reliable, repeatable, adaptable to a wide variety of cell type sizes and geometries, which is really important for developing regulations. And we've conducted some full vehicle testing using this device and methodology. And those tests have all been really successful, and the vehicles have all sort of met the requirements of what is in the standards so far. So electric vehicle safety research going forward, sort of our next steps, we continue to work towards a refinement of the trim method to examine different cell chemistries and form factors to make sure that it remains a sort of viable test tool. We also plan to publish some research in the next year. We've conducted a literature review on electric vehicle battery fires, so that will be on our website this year. We're also expanding our focus of our research from light-duty vehicles to micromobility devices by doing some risk assessments and teardowns, as well as abuse testing, and to heavy-duty vehicles focusing on crash worthiness and to assess whether the requirements should differ from light-duty vehicles. That's all that I had for today, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak to you all.
Thank you very much, Jessie. We really appreciate your presentation, and now we're going to open it up to the audience. If you have questions, I know there's at least one in the Q&A. And just as some audience members, you are thinking about your questions, I just want to take the opportunity to again thank our speakers. And I do want to mention that some of our colleagues and friends from Transport Canada are here with us. Martha Christensen, Jordan Wolf, not here are Sandra Gravel, Michel Bellon, Julie Lagondeau. And I also want to thank Annabelle Terrien and Zoe Boychescu and Ria Leverder, who are the brain trust of CFC and really make these things happen. So I want to thank you all. And hopefully that little plug gave you time to assemble your questions. And you can put your questions in the Q&A. Is that right, Annabelle, or is there another way as well that we can take questions?
Yes, they can also put them in the chat room if they want.
Great. Okay. So I have a question here from Anthony, and I think this one is directed to you, Kevin, Jess, or maybe to Jessie, but maybe to both of you. Who is currently doing research and data collection?
So assuming that we're talking about the research on alternative vehicles, Anthony, research is happening in a number of places. Jesse's just mentioned some of that's happening at the National Research Council. A large volume of the research is being done through the Fire Research Services Institute, which is an arm of Underwriters Laboratories, or UL Solutions. And that seems to be now moving from smaller lithium-ion batteries to looking at larger vehicle-related lithium-ion battery situations. UL Advisory Council also has set up a task group to look at the topic of battery, or not battery, but energy storage in and use in a number of different things. So there's lots of research. Coordinating that may be a bit of a concern, and that's certainly a place where I see the fire service wanting, likely, and I think needing to get involved in addressing our concerns, because as I mentioned in the report, the how to put the fire out is rarely at the front end of designing and building something. So,
Kevin, thank you. So we have a second question that my friend and colleague Annabelle has answered, is where can we find the slides? So Annabelle, I think you just posted them. We're going to post them on the website as well. So thank you for that question. Could the slide decks be shared? Absolutely. They will be shared, so we will put them on the web pages that Ria and our speakers have put in the slide decks. So there should be on our homepage a slider that you saw at the beginning of the webinar. Follow that, and you should be able to get to either the MHD, the medium and heavy duty zero emissions vehicles work, or the CERFLIT work. They're live now on the resource page, Ria says. Thank you. Okay, I'll just see what other questions. Anthony has another question. You mentioned a little bit about environmental concerns. What about firefighter safety and contaminants generated from EV fires?
And once again, Anthony, those are things that are of concern, certainly, both as what contaminates a firefighter and what contaminates the surrounding environment, particularly including surface runoff and where that goes and what it contains. The research that I've been able to find is a little bit less focused on the additional contaminants that a firefighter might be exposed to and more on what might be going into the water. But the environment, and when you get into the report, you'll notice that, there's people who want to dunk vehicles, or at least for small light duty vehicles, they want to dunk them in a dumpster full of water, or they want to pull them into a dumpster, or they want to shoot a special nozzle up underneath or use a cellar nozzle inside. I mean, all of those things are options for suppression, but they all create runoff that we don't necessarily know, and we currently don't seem to have protocols on how do we contain and retain that, how do we test it, who tests it for what. Those are all questions that still need to be answered.
Thanks very much, Kevin. Let's see if there are any other questions in the chat that we haven't answered. I think we've got them all. So we'll do a last call. Is that a follow-up question? We'll do last call for questions. So I do just again want to thank everybody for coming. I want to thank our presenters, our speakers. I hope that the information is going to be useful and used. And if any of you in the audience have ideas or comments when you look at the resource pages, please just send an email to info@cfc.ca. We always like to hear from you. So I guess that concludes our webinar today. If you have friends or colleagues who meant to be here but couldn't, it has been recorded. Ria has recorded it. We will share the recording, and please stay in touch with us. Thank you for all you do. Be safe. If you're near my place and have a huge snowstorm, be careful shoveling, and we'll talk again soon. Thank you all. Thank you.